My Lords, I very much welcome this debate and congratulate Baroness Jenkins on securing it and introducing it so effectively. I think she started by talking about the importance of safeguarding children, and whatever else we disagree on today in this chamber, I think we would all accept that that is absolutely vital, and we have an obligation to make sure that it is as effective as possible. I agree with the thrust of her arguments completely. I take the view she does on many of the issues that are facing society and schools now. I just want, in the time I've got, to take up one or 2 points. It's important to remember that we've got awful things still happen, but safeguarding in schools is far better than it was when I started teaching. We know now what risk children have. And I think the truth is that for many children, schools are the safest places in their lives. So huge progress has been made. And I think we ought to acknowledge that, because it is an extra burden of teachers and it is a skilled job. You have to learn to do it. And I was teaching during that period of having to learn to do it. And it's not easy, because it's about changing your culture. By the time you've got to an adult, it's quite difficult to change your culture. And one of the ways in which that culture has been changed over 20 to 30 years is that partnership between government and schools, where society has decided what it wants to accept, and government has passed legislation and issued guidance so that schools have a framework in which they can make decisions. And I think that's why it's improved, without being complacent about what still needs to be done. So I want to take up the issues that the Noble Baroness Jenkins said of where we've not got it right, and just not dismiss, but just comment on one very briefly. Online risk is terrible. What happens? I don't know how schools deal with it, given the tight-knit communities that they are. But at least now we've got agreement in adult society that we've got to do as much as we can to change it and to offer protection for children. And we've got the beginnings of a legislative framework whereby that can happen. So I want to move on to the issue of sex and gender and self-ID in children and schools, and ask why we've not got that adult agreement, what we want for our children, and we've not got the legislative framework, and we've not got the guidance which gives that secure framework against which teachers can make their decisions. Because that's what's happening. The good we've achieved has been through guidance and legislation and adults agreeing what's best for children. And that's not happening in the issue of whether children and young people should be able to self-identify their sex, and schools whether they should support them or not. And while we're dithering about issuing guidance and wondering what we should do on this very difficult issue, teachers are picking up the pieces every day in their schools. And it's not just the odd school, it's not just one school in 10, it's every school where these difficult conversations are taking place, and where children are growing up asking themselves these questions, and teachers are trying to discharge their responsibility to help them without the framework to guide them. So they're dealing with issues like whether they should have single-sex spaces in changing rooms when a male pupil identifies as a woman and as a girl and wants to access the safe space. They're having to decide issues like sport, where weight and stature matter, and so we've got single-sex sports. They're having to decide to children whether they can change their pronouns. They're having to make decisions as to whether they should advise a child to refer to a gender identity clinic. And they're even having to make decisions as to whether they should keep it a secret or whether they should talk to a parent. Now, this isn't an easy issue for adults. I completely understand that. But we shouldn't leave it so that we're creating such uncertainty for teachers. Many teachers have their own views. They're conflicted in what they should say to the children in their charge. And even where the national curriculum says something what I think is as straightforward as there are two sexes and children should be taught that in biology, some teachers don't know now whether they should be doing that because of the lack of guidance and advice that they're getting. They're dealing with pressure groups who have opposite ideas to each other, and they are essentially taking the legal risk, because it's them who's at risk of being accused by parents of teaching things that they don't want their children to learn, because as an adult society and as government, the framework has not been presented to them. Look, young people, it's a difficult time growing up when your body's changing. We've all been through it, with children and grandchildren who are going through it. It is not easy. And many young people have a very difficult relationship with their body. But I don't think they should be encouraged to think that changing their sex is an answer to those dilemmas. And yet what we see in the last 10 years, the number of girls who've been referred to a gender identity clinic has gone up from 32 to 1,740, and boys from 40 to 626. Now, I don't know why that's happening. I've read the theories, I can hazard a guess, but I do know that those children are in someone's school. They've got teachers in charge of their pastoral and academic well-being, and we're not giving them the guidance to enable them to make effective decisions. And my own view also is that sometimes you think, well, let's go for a halfway house and let's permit social transitioning, but not, as I think we won't do now following the Cass report, refer children for puberty blockers. But once you start children on that journey, you may cause them psychological damage. What we also know is that the number of children who are referring to gender identity clinics are statistically far more likely to have mental health issues or be on the moderate to severe autism spectrum. And children change their minds. Thank goodness they change their minds. It's part of growing up. But we shouldn't make them commit, enforce that commitment so that it's difficult to change their minds if they do change their minds later on. And it's not just the children who are perhaps asking these questions and wondering whether they've been born into the wrong body that are suffering because of our lack of providing a legal framework. It's every children in the school. Because if safe-sex spaces and if sports are changed, it's every child who is affected by that. Last thing I want to say is this: as strongly as I might say that guidance is needed, and I hope it's being issued today and the Minister can say that, as long as I can say that and as strongly as I can say that, as strongly as I feel about children not being encouraged to change sex, I feel equally strongly that children must be listened to, whatever they say and whatever view they express, that they must be taken seriously and they must be supported. They must not be bullied, no matter how much how they present themselves, and links with parents must be maintained wherever possible. I genuinely hope that guidance is issued soon, and I genuinely hope that very quickly adults can give guidance to teachers about how they deal with the next generation.
My Lords, Baroness Brinton is taking part remotely